Vonda N. McIntyre published The Entropy Effect in 1981. This is a Captain Kirk-era, completely canon Star Trek Expanded Universe novel. So mostly in this review, I'm going to be taking a look at all of the nonsense that made this otherwise fun space adventure into something of an omnishambles. So right up front, not only had I never read a single Star Trek novel before The Entropy Effect, but I'm actually more of a Star Wars guy myself. In fact, I've never even seen a single episode of any season of Star Trek ever, and the only movies I've ever seen were the J.J. Abrams lens flare extravaganzas that came out recently, and the one with the Borg cube back in the 90s. That one was pretty cool. This book features Spock, Kirk, Bones, Scotty, and even Sulu, Uhura, and Chekhov. You don't have to be a lifelong Star Trek fan to know who these characters are, and I think it's really a testament to the pervasiveness and the quality of the original series that these characters are so well known throughout the public. And not only do I know their names and what they look like, but I've got a really good sense for what their characters are as well. I took a lot of notes, and I mean a lot of notes, way more than I could possibly use in this video. But suffice to say, I have absorbed this book better than most books that I've ever read in my entire life. I'm not saying I know this book better than anybody. That's impossible. I'm not a lifelong Star Trek fan. I'm not super familiar with this fandom. I'm sure there's a bunch of stuff in this book that went right over my head. But if you want to be the king of the Entropy Effect mountain, you're going to have to fight me for it. Now, at the making of this video, the Entropy Effect is 42 years old, and it's being given away for free. Simon & Schuster is giving this book away for free as an ebook for signing up for their newsletter. That's actually how I heard about this book in the first place. And if you really wanted to read this book, you were never going to read The Entropy Effect. So I have absolutely no qualms whatsoever in spoiling this entire plot cover to cover. So let's get on with it. Buckle up. This is gonna get weird. Hey, just a quick editing note as I'm putting the final touches on this video. I wanted to say that my channel has grown a lot in the last week or two, and I've gone over 100 subscribers. Finally, this is really great news, and it's really encouraging. And so this video is actually going to kind of function as my 100 subscriber special. That may or may not have been the plan all along, but this video is a little bit different than most of the videos that I do, as you're about to see. So thanks again for all the support. It means the world to me. And maybe if we get to 1,000 subscribers, I'll make another video like this. But stick around to the end of this video for the books that I'm considering spoiling for you. The Entropy Effect opens up on the Enterprise, in orbit around a naked singularity, the first of its kind ever discovered by Starfleet. Mr. Spock is the only crew member studying the naked singularity, and he's been at it non-stop for 6 weeks. He's altered his circadian rhythm so he doesn't have to sleep. The ship's engines are under strain as the Enterprise is being rocked by almost incalculable radiation. Now, Spock has made a terrible discovery. Due to the acceleration of entropy, the universe will not end in billions of years or even millions of years, but will tear itself apart in just under 100 years. Yes, the universe is heading for imminent collapse within a century. But the Enterprise is called away from studying the naked singularity before Spock can duplicate and thus confirm his discoveries and report them to Starfleet.
Incoming transmission.
Captain Kirk has received a subspace transmission with the ultra-rare Ultimate Override command code. Now, this code has come from a mining colony called Aleph Prime, and the use of the Ultimate Override indicates urgency, the need for secrecy, and probably an ongoing emergency. So Kirk directs the Enterprise to Aleph Prime as ordered under a strict communications blackout. Helm Officer Sulu and Lieutenant Commander Mandala Flynn spar on a judo mat, and we see a budding romance between the two. We discover that Sulu's first name is Hikaru, or the Shining One. This detail added by McIntyre for the Entropy Effect would later become canon. Sulu getting a first name here is basically the only thing of note that happens for his character in this entire book, even though he gets a lot of page time. Anyway, more on this romance later, just don't get too excited. The crew of the Enterprise is on high alert because the ultimate command override has been used to summon them to Aleph Prime. But according to Ian Braithwaite, the lead prosecuting attorney in the colony, there is no emergency. And never was. The Enterprise was called away from studying the imminent collapse of the universe to transfer a single prisoner one star system over to Rehab Colony 7. The prisoner in question is Georges Mordreau, a physicist who is found guilty of murder and inhumane experimentation. Kirk is just furious that Ian Braithwaite, the attorney, would divert the Enterprise, a ship of the line with a crew of 435, for what amounts to a milk run. But Braithwaite insists that not only did he not request the Enterprise in particular, but he also didn't authorize the use of the ultimate override command. Still, Kirk wants nothing to do with this prisoner transfer. It is not the kind of mission the Enterprise takes on. But Spock convinces Kirk to take the mission. Why? Because coincidentally, out of all sentient beings in the galaxy, Georges Mordreau happens to be Spock's old physics professor. Spock knew Mordreau as a man of peace and doesn't believe him capable of murder. Combine that with the curious case of the ultimate override command authorized by parties unknown, and Spock finds this whole situation a little bit fishy and he wants to investigate. So how poetic is it that Spock is studying the most important physics discovery in the history of the galaxy, and he's only called away to see to the care of his old physics professor, the man who instructed him at the academy.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme, every stanza kind of rhymes with the last one. Hopefully it'll work.
Sulu is considering a transfer off the Enterprise because he believes his resume requires a little more variety if he's ever going to distinguish himself in his career. Flynn is also hoping to distinguish herself, but while our guy Sulu is given all these strong characteristics that make him seem practical and driven, Flynn's ambitions make her seem super neurotic and needy. So Sulu and Flynn discuss their ambitions in an intimate setting while moving ever closer to sleeping with each other for the very first time. Apparently, the only acceptable in-world sexy pillow talk is career advancement. But ultimately, they decide not to have sex because if Sulu is transferred, that's going to make saying goodbye that much harder. All this is really boring, but I stuck with it because I was sure that it was going to come back and be significant later. I was sure of it. The story here slows down a lot. Like, a lot. So I'm just going to hurry through this part. Sulu and Flynn talk a lot more, and ultimately Sulu gets his transfer off the Enterprise. He's transferred to Captain Hunter's ship. Captain Hunter is one of Captain Kirk's old flames, and we'll hear more about her in just a minute. Sulu has his bags packed and he goes to visit Flynn to say goodbye, and they immediately change their minds about the whole not having sex thing. Kirk's mood is morose, and he explains his down mood to his friend McCoy. He tells him that Captain Hunter, the officer under whose command Sulu has transferred, is part of a polyamorous relationship composed not of 3 or 4 adult human beings, but of 9 consenting adults. In the past, the partnership family had basically proposed marriage to Kirk and invited him to join the family 3 times. But Kirk turned them down every time, despite the fact that he believed he loved Hunter and that he could love all of the other participants of this poly family. And now that he's been in contact with Hunter again, he's feeling regretful that he didn't accept the invitation and he doesn't know how to tell her. Bones thinks that Kirk should just go ahead and invite himself back into the partnership family, but Kirk explains that that's not how it works and that it would be seen as so rude they'd be basically obligated to tell him no. Can you imagine being in a relationship with 9 significant others? Polyamory is a subject that Vonda McIntyre explores more in her novel Dream Snake and her Starfarer series. And interestingly enough, sci-fi author Robert Heinlein wrote a novel called Friday about a secret operative of the future named Friday Jones who was in a poly relationship. Heinlein dedicated this novel to 31 different women. Vonda McIntyre was among them. That book, Friday, was published just 1 year after The Entropy Effect. And I gotta wonder. There's this part later on where the Enterprise takes on Professor Mordreau as a prisoner. Kirk orders his chief security officer, Lieutenant Commander Mandala Flynn, to put on a big show of security for the sake of lead prosecuting attorney Ian Braithwaite, even though neither Kirk nor Spock believes that Georges Mordreau is a danger to anyone on board. It's a charade that Kirk intends to keep up just long enough to get Braithwaite back off the ship, but it turns out that Braithwaite has orders from Starfleet to hitch a ride with the Enterprise all the way to Rehab Colony 7 and escort the prisoner. This absolutely annoys the piss out of Kirk, and he tells Braithwaite that when the prisoner transfer is over, the Enterprise can't be ferrying Braithwaite back to Aleph Prime, so he's going to find his own ride. Braithwaite said he's going to sail back home, as in sailing the solar winds in an unpowered ship. Now, on page 127, it says this: he raced sail ships as a hobby. He could match techniques with anyone from Aleph, tacking between magnetic field and solar wind or running free before an ion storm toward interstellar space. But the racers he handled, the swiftest, frailest, most dangerous, and exhilarating ones, lacked any engine at all. Is this a thing in the Star Trek universe? Like, wouldn't sailing the solar winds take literally thousands and thousands of years between star systems? If you're invested in this fandom, please let me know in the comments. What's up with sailing? And make sure to call me a lot of mean names in the comments if I've misunderstood the science behind all this. We close in on Scotty, who's feeling very left out of the loop in regards to the Enterprise's mission. He's on his way up to the bridge to brief Captain Kirk about the state of the engines when he runs into Commander Spock coming out of the transporter room. They have a brief discussion, and Scotty gets on the turbolift heading up to the bridge, leaving Spock behind. Scotty joins Kirk on the bridge with Lieutenant Commander Flynn and Ian Braithwaite. Scotty tells Kirk that the Enterprise should not fly at warp speeds just yet, so they need to stay sublight. This is fine with Kirk because, coincidentally, their destination, Rehab Colony 7, is so close that if they flew at warp anyway, they would overshoot their destination. So it's just not a big deal about the engines needing repairs at this point. Now, during this briefing, Spock walks over to listen in. He was already on the bridge. Now, Scotty obviously is taken aback because he just saw Spock downstairs in the transporter room. But Spock denies that he's been in the transporter room at any time in the last several hours. Scotty suspects something very strange is going on and tries to explain this to Captain Kirk, but Kirk just assumes that Scotty's overworked and is very tired and sends him off to have a nap. And Scotty departs super frustrated that nobody's taking him seriously. This is important. Scotty's about to get salty. Just then, while Kirk, Spock, Flynn, and Braithwaite are all in discussion on the bridge, the prisoner Mordreau jumps out of the turbolift with an ugly pistol. He's also screaming, "Kirk, you destroyed me!" Lieutenant Commander Flynn and Spock both charge the prisoner, but he gets off a few shots before anyone can do anything, and he escapes again before they can catch him. Both Flynn and Kirk are hit with pistol shots. Kirk is shot in the chest, exposing an artery above his heart, and McCoy is summoned and quickly stops the bleeding, but Kirk loses consciousness. Spock thinks he's dead because he's been using that Vulcan mind connective consciousness thing. Flynn was shot in the collarbone and survives momentarily, but dies later in the corridor because she was infected with a toxin known as spiderweb. Spiderweb is a terrorist's weapon, banned everywhere in the Federation, but it's easy to produce at home, hence a favorite of terrorists. It's a biotoxin that targets the nervous system and grows literal webs inside the body that basically chokes out the brain. So yeah, sounds pretty easy to make in my basement. Now, Braithwaite is also knocked unconscious in this melee, and he suffers a concussion, but we don't actually find out about that until 4 pages later. I think McIntyre forgot to actually write that part in. He's not even mentioned in the fight, but then later we're told that he's been knocked unconscious. It's really disorienting. But it's important because that's going to come into play a little bit later. So remember that he's got a concussion. So McCoy takes Kirk down to medical and Spock investigates. He goes down to Mordreau's cell to see what's up. Turns out the prisoner, Georges Mordreau, never left his cell. He's been under guard the entire time. As Spock interviews Mordreau, Mordreau pleads his innocence, claiming he never did it. But Spock, though he wants to believe him, says he has the evidence of his own eyes. He saw him come off the turbo lift and shoot Kirk and Flynn. The mystery being that Mordreau was under guard the entire time. Spock never puts 2 and 2 together. Scotty, someone whose judgment Spock absolutely should have trusted, claims to have seen a duplicate Spock on board the Enterprise. But it never even crosses Spock's mind that something fishy is going on, even when confronted with the mystery of Mordreau being in 2 places at once. I mean, we're talking about the Enterprise here. Hasn't enough weird shit gone on board this ship that when something weird happens, Spock's gonna pay attention to it? All I'm saying is that 15 years experiencing the out of the ordinary really ought to be enough experience that Spock trusts his Starfleet officers when they bring something like this to his attention. And it really should factor into his logic. Anyway, this book has become something of a locked room mystery where it's the suspect found in the locked room instead of the victim, which is kind of a unique spin. Dr. McCoy is sitting vigil over Captain Kirk's body and drinking a lot of whiskey. Kirk is brain dead, but McCoy is in denial and keeps him on life support. By the way, in the book, we only actually get to see McCoy remembering operating on Kirk. We don't actually get to see him do the thing. We're told that he's operated on Kirk's chest wound and sealed it up well enough that were he to survive, you wouldn't even notice a scar. Which is impressive considering the fact that the hole was big and deep enough that with the naked eye, you could see all the way through into his coronary arteries. Anyway, this is one of my biggest pet peeves in books like this. I read adventure books for the thrilling bits, not to have characters remember them after they've happened. McCoy gazes into his amber whiskey and thinks, amazing how many different supposedly intelligent species choose a downright poison as their recreational drug of choice. And McCoy goes on to remember how Spock even got drunk once, but he refuses to ever talk about it. And he says, oh, never mind. Spock was no more fun drunk than sober. Which I think is probably the funniest joke in the whole book. Anyway, right about then, Spock joins McCoy in medical and insists that McCoy take Kirk off life support because clearly all brain functions have ceased and will never again resume. He's only delaying the inevitable, and doing so is a cruelty. But this situation really puts Spock's bedside manner to the test because he tells McCoy, there is no hope for recovery. The body that remains is a shell. It is no more alive than any anencephalic clone, waiting for its owner to butcher it for its parts. And so McCoy's like, damn it, Spock! And he takes a big swing at him. And he's drunk, and Spock dodges it easily, and they tussle for a while, but Spock, the half Vulcan, is physically superior in every way to McCoy, and he's sober, and McCoy... It's just a bit of slapstick at the bedside of their dying friend. It's tonally just all weird. I think it was meant to be very dramatic, but it just comes across as comical. Oh, and the spine of this book finally gave out. It's been dying to do that for a long time, but it finally just split on me. So Spock's physical superiority and emotional aloofness finally subdues McCoy, and McCoy relents and decides that it's time ultimately to take Kirk off life support, which he does. Now, in McCoy's grief for the loss of his friend, he suggests that the Enterprise use the known whiplash effect of the sublight engines to travel back in time to prevent both Kirk and Flynn's untimely deaths. After all, time travel is easily achieved in this universe just using a trick of the engines. It's the whiplash effect. Something that I had never heard of before I read this book, but why should I have? But apparently they go back in time a lot. And McCoy brings this up and he says, let's go back in time, let's do this, we've done it before. But Spock insists that all those times that they did it before was to set the timeline to rights. But death is a natural and necessary part of life that cannot be and should not be altered just because we don't like this part of the timeline. So this is a key distinction that comes into play a little bit later. But McCoy's despair will not be soothed by talks of destiny. He lashes out at Spock again and says, "I don't care about the future. To hell with you. You're not my dad." Actually, no. He says, "You're not the only one who knows how to use the whiplash effect. I'm going to find Scotty." Now, Scotty's the engineer aboard the Enterprise and knows exactly how to use the whiplash effect. Spock, now in command of the Enterprise, confines McCoy to quarters because he can't have the drunk ship's doctor going off time traveling all willy-nilly. Eccentric time-traveling doctors. Now, where have I seen that before? So Spock then goes off and interviews two security officials, Snanag Feshtali and Jennifer Aristides. Aristides was meant to be on duty when the two murders happened. However, she had taken ill, lost consciousness, and somebody had to fill in for her. Now, even though this happened before the murders took place, Aristides blames herself and is now literally suicidal because she believes she should have been on duty to prevent this from ever happening. You see, Aristides is a 2.5 meter tall, very strong, genetically modified human being whose people back home are immune to most toxins and almost all diseases and never get sick. So, since illness is anathema to her kind, coming down with a foodborne illness and missing a shift at work when somebody gets murdered has left her suicidal. But Spock has had her blood analyzed and discovered that she was poisoned with a very, very high dose of Clostridium botulinum, a dose so high that it would have killed anyone else on board. Whoever poisoned her didn't count on her genetic constitution. Spock assures her she doesn't need to be suicidal because she's weak. In fact, she was strong enough to survive a high-dose toxic poisoning. And so because of that, and for no other stated reason, Aristides doesn't need to kill herself. And that's just not... It seems to me that the most toxic thing in this book is not the terrorist weapon spiderweb or the high-dose botulism poison, but it's Spock's logic. And then, to diffuse the depressive tension of having a suicidal character in our jaunty space adventure, Snanag Feshtali assures Spock that
"She will not hurt herself now. If she tries, I will tear out her throat."
Big laughs. Snanag Feshtali is the most 80s sci-fi name I think I've ever heard. I love it. Most of the book he's called Snarl or just Feshtali. But I prefer to have the entire name written out. Snanag Feshtali. Yeah, I like that. But one thing is for certain. Somebody poisoned Aristides while the prisoner Mordreau was confined. And so Spock and the others are searching the ship for an accomplice. So Starfleet has ordered Captain Hunter, remember her? The highest ranking officer in the sector, to catch up with the Enterprise and investigate Kirk's murder. And so since Sulu has recently transferred under her command, she informs Sulu of Captain Kirk's death. And then she offhandedly mentions the death of Lieutenant Commander Mandala Flynn, not knowing that Sulu and Flynn were lovers. So now, coincidentally, both Hunter and Sulu have romantic ties to both of the deceased members of the Enterprise. It's all very tragic.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Spock returns to Mordreau's cell, and Mordreau finally reveals to Spock the nature of his trial and his conviction. It turns out that Mordreau had put his theoretical work on temporal physics into practical use. which apparently Spock had known about all along. The theoretical work on temporal physics, I mean. Okay, so we've already established that Spock didn't put two and two together when Scotty told him that he saw a duplicate Spock on board. But now we find out that Spock knew that Mordreau was experimenting with time travel, and he still hasn't put it together? I mean, the Enterprise, not only have they experienced a lot of weird shit in the past, but they've specifically experienced time travel. This is not new to them. In fact, just a quick search on the Google tells me that time travel is exceptionally common in this universe. Come on! Where was I? Oh yeah, Mordreau. Mordreau insists that he never killed anyone. He was found guilty of murder and unethical experimentation, but what he had done was send 6 of his scientist friends back into the past and left them there to stay. And he did so at their persuasive insistence. When the Federation found out about this... So wait, how did the Federation find out about this? I don't know. It's never explained. They deemed time travel in civilian hands to be way too dangerous to ever be made public. Probably not an overreaction, honestly. So they suppressed Mordreau's work and gave him the most severe sentence possible under law: rehabilitation. Rehabilitation seems to be a kind of psychological manipulation that, like most things in this book, are not adequately described. Maybe rehabilitation is described in the show or in some of the movies or in the other books, and we're just expected to know, but I'm not sure. So again, if you're part of this fandom, let me know in the comments, what's up with rehabilitation? Is it counseling? Torture? Brainwashing? Okay, now follow me on this. Professor Mordreau hypothesizes that at some point in the future, he goes insane and blames Captain Kirk for all of his troubles, and so decides to come back and kill him. Which means in the present, they must be on some kind of timeline in which Kirk would have sided with Spock and not sent Mordreau into rehab in the first place, thus driving Mordreau insane. But why does he go insane? I don't know. It's never explained. But if future Mordreau comes back in time and kills Kirk, then Kirk can't survive into the future long enough to allow Mordreau to go insane and thus come back in time to kill Kirk in the first place. So there would never have been the impetus for Mordreau to come back and kill Kirk? So Kirk would survive and future Mordreau would end up insane and come back and kill Kirk. So there would be no impetus for Mordreau to come back and kill Kirk. So Kirk would survive and future Mordreau would end up insane and come back and kill Kirk. So there would be no impetus for Mordreau to come back and kill Kirk, and Kirk would survive. So if that's not the answer, is the murderer a future Mordreau that got mixed up from another parallel timeline? I don't know. It's never explained. But this is where it gets really frustrating. Spock finally realizes that it was the fact that Mordreau had sent his 6 friends back into the past in the first place that caused the naked singularity to form, thus endangering the universe. Even though Mordreau sent his 6 friends back in time 1 month ago, and Spock has been studying the naked singularity for 6 weeks, and who knows how long it was there before it was even discovered. So why do these 2 major cause and effect elements not align in this plot? I don't know. It's never explained. But that's not what's frustrating. This is. So Spock wants to correct the timeline and go back in time and intervene in the entropy effect, which is going to tear the universe apart inside 100 years. To do this, Spock needs to use Mordreau's research to go back in time to stop past Mordreau from sending his friends into the past, thus creating the naked singularity in the first place. But in Mordreau's mind, that's tantamount to what the Federation has already done to him by suppressing his work, and it's just super insulting to suppress the work of a scientist, even if that work destroys the entire universe. So if Spock's plan is going to be to stop his past self from sending his friends into the past, Mordreau will refuse to help Spock at all. So after just half a page of debate, Spock gives up on trying to save the universe and decides to just save his friend Jim Kirk instead, on the logic that Kirk should have never been killed if the timelines had never been altered in the first place. So saving Kirk will be setting parts of the timeline to rights. So he compromises with the professor promising not to go back and stop him from sending his friends back in time, thus creating the naked singularity that's going to destroy the universe, and instead just go back and save Jim Kirk's life, and Murdrow agrees. Are you following all this? The first time I read this, I thought that I must have misunderstood what was happening, and that Murdrow didn't want to send Spock back in time to stop his past self from sending his friends into the past, because the further removed you are from an event that you're trying to alter, the more difficult it is to change that event. And Murdrow just knows this somehow, even though he's never traveled back in time. This version of him, the prisoner Murdrow, has never actually time traveled himself. Not yet. And none of the people he sent back in time have ever come back to talk to him. Whatever happened to them? How far did they go back in the past? What did they change, if anything? I don't know. It's never explained. So I thought it was saying that since those 6 scientists were sent back in time a month ago and Kirk died only a day ago, it was going to be easier to just save Kirk's life than to change the events of a month past. Because reasons. But as we'll soon see, that's not the reasoning at all. Spock just takes his promises very seriously and makes them very easily. So yeah, Spock actually makes the promise not to use Murdrow's work to save the universe, but instead to go back in time and save Kirk's life at the expense of the universe. And that is Vulcan logic, according to Vonda N. McIntyre. Spock finds McCoy, who has a righteous hangover. McCoy apologizes for suggesting that the Enterprise uses the whiplash effect to go back in time just to save Jim Kirk's life. He recognizes that time travel is an inappropriate method to save somebody's life. But Spock waves all that off, and he tells McCoy that he's going to time travel to go save Jim Kirk's life. And McCoy is just totally nonplussed and does that whole, "Damn it, Spock!" But anyway, because Spock is now in command of the Enterprise, he needs Bones to cover for him while he's time traveling. Can't be time traveling and commanding a ship at the same time. So Bones suggests that he just tell everybody that Spock is catching up on some sleep after being awake for 6 weeks straight. You remember that from the beginning? Yeah, he hasn't slept for 6 weeks straight, and it's starting to catch up with him. So they agree to that, and Spock goes off to build a time machine, which he does in 2 hours. 2 hours! The time machine is called a time changer. What does it look like? How does it function? I don't know. It's never explained. But get this. The Enterprise now has 3 ways to time travel. They've got the time changer, and they've got the whiplash effect, and they can kind of orbit real fast around a singularity. Now, orbiting around a singularity is dangerous and it's really inaccurate. It's almost impossible. Actually, it is impossible to aim how far back into the past they go. So they don't like to use that one. So that one's probably going to be out. The whiplash effect can be aimed in time, but it sends the whole ship back, and they don't want to bring the whole crew back all at once. The time changer, that is solo time travel for the user only. So we have options here. Since the time changer is never given any kind of proper description, except that it can be held in both hands, I just made it look like this. That is a 1981 German vintage 400 watt chrome bakelite toaster that I found on eBay. There were lots of pictures on the listing, so that made it a handy prop for this high-tech animation. So McCoy starts the deception and tells both Ian Braithwaite and Scotty that he's been left in charge and that Spock has gone to sleep. Scotty is offended yet again because he is the rightful number 3 in charge behind Kirk and Spock and is feeling very much left out of the loop and disrespected. And this is the moment when Ian Braithwaite starts his own investigation into the murders of Kirk and Flynn. He begins interviewing crew members, starting with the very disgruntled Scotty. But it's not really an investigation as much as it is a witch hunt. Braithwaite has some preconceived theories here, and he's trying to prove that Spock was behind the whole thing, that he planned Kirk's death, and that McCoy and Flynn were actually his accomplices, even though Flynn ended up dead. Why does Braithwaite believe this crazy theory without evidence of any kind? I don't know. It's never explained. But the meddling attorney is convinced that Spock, who he's only known for a couple of days, is a traitor to Starfleet and is planning on selling the Enterprise off to the Klingons and auctioning all the crew off as hostages. Scotty is skeptical of Braithwaite at first, but for some reason, Scotty turns on his crew and sides with this stranger, a lawyer from Aleph Prime. Somebody Scotty literally met just that day. Somebody who isn't even a Starfleet officer, somebody with a vendetta both obvious in its ambition and confoundingly mysterious in its motivation. All I'm saying is nobody who reads this book could possibly buy Scotty's turncoating after so blatant of manipulation. This is classic character assassination. Look, there are ways to honor the source material, and then there are ways to trash it. So get this, Braithwaite saw the duplicate Mordreau shoot Kirk on the bridge, right? And Braithwaite was the lead prosecuting attorney for the Federation back on Aleph Prime. So Braithwaite knows exactly what Mordreau's work was all about because the trial was about the paradoxes and hazards involved in time travel. Wouldn't that be something worth mentioning to the crew? Wouldn't that be worth factoring into one's own conspiracy theories? But no, he never mentions his own personal knowledge of Mordreau's ability to time travel until the end of the book. But here in chapter 5, Braithwaite puts forward this crazy, weird theory to Scotty that perhaps Mordreau was beamed out of his cell to the transporter room, took the lift up to the bridge, shot Kirk and Flynn, went back down to the transporter room, and was beamed back into his cell, and no one was ever none the wiser. And he asks Scotty if that's possible, and Scotty's like, I guess. But given all the exact, complete, first-hand knowledge Braithwaite has about Mordreau being a time-traveling physicist, why all the roundabout? Why all the subterfuge? Why all the misdirection with Scotty? It's obvious, because Vonda McIntyre fucked up. She didn't think about it until the book was already written, and it would have ruined everything if she'd have gone back and changed his theory from the beginning of his investigation. So she writes it as though Braithwaite never even thinks of Mordreau as a time-traveling double until the very end. And so, but by the time he voices his thoughts, it's clear that he's been thinking this all along. It's never been a doubt in his mind. And so this thought that's proffered from Braithwaite that there's a time traveler from the future who's come to do all this contradicts everything that he's done so far. And it only comes to the reader's attention when it's no longer inconvenient for someone else on board to have figured it out before Spock did. Can we move on to chapter 6? Spock alters a transporter using something called bioelectronics, something he coincidentally picked up on Aleph Prime to support his research into the naked singularity. What are bioelectronics? I don't know. Vonda McIntyre doesn't really describe them very well, so I looked them up on a fandom wiki. Bioelectronic crystals are a type of crystal material that can be grown organically and adapted to transfer electrical current in applications of electronics. They were discovered during the 2270s. Thank you, Memory Beta. Spock then calibrates the time changer to send him back just one day, just moments before Kirk was murdered. How does he calibrate the time changer for a specific time and place in history to travel to? I don't know. It's never explained. McCoy is worried about how Spock is going to get back to the present, so Spock explains it thusly. As you so astutely pointed out, if I succeed, I will not need to come back. But if I should be forced to return, the energy required is far less. In fact, after achieving threshold energy, one is virtually dragged back to one's old time. One sets up a strain that must eventually be relieved. The changer's power pack will be sufficient. The auxiliary changer will pull me back. If I am gone for an unconscionably long time, it is essential that I, or whatever remains of me, be brought back here to my own time. All you need to do is activate it. But this signal cannot be accurately aimed. My body might be scattered across the entire star system. It is not likely that I would survive if you were forced to use it. Got all that? Spock engages the device and disappears in a flash of rainbow lightning. The Enterprise loses power and everything is thrown into upheaval. Ian Braithwaite is on the prowl and causing trouble all over the ship, being belligerent and interviewing crew members and casting aspersions, even about the dead. McCoy, now in temporary command of the Enterprise and very irritated with Braithwaite, confines the attorney to quarters to buy Spock time to travel into the past and try again. But then Scotty comes along and, with a bruised ego of an unholy snit and in total defiance of McCoy, breaks Braithwaite out of confinement. Again, none of you is buying this about Scotty, right? Braithwaite and Scotty track McCoy down to the transporter room where the attorney accuses the doctor of pulling the plug on Kirk while he was still alive. You see, at the time when Kirk was being taken off life support, Braithwaite was in a nearby hospital bed recovering from his concussion. The concussion he got when Mordreau came down and there was all that commotion on the bridge and Flynn and Kirk were shot in the first place. And from his hospital bed, Braithwaite overhears the conversation between Spock and McCoy about taking Kirk off life support. Except, of course, he's misconstrued the entire thing because, and get this, he was sedated. And tell me in the comments if this makes any sense, but as a treatment for a concussion, McCoy sedated Braithwaite. So here's Braithwaite's evidence against Spock, a misunderstood conversation he had while sedated. As an experienced lawyer who plans on bringing a case against Spock and McCoy to the Federation, you would think that he would know that his testimony would be inadmissible. I'm sure even in this Star Trek universe, a sedated man's testimony wouldn't be admissible, right? And that he would factor that into his plans and also into his conspiracy theories. He was sedated when he heard this, and everybody he's talked to is telling him that he's wrong. Anyway, Bones tries to set Braithwaite straight and tells him he knows how to read brainwaves even when he's drunk. Yes, even when he's drunk. Not a terribly strong case from our friend Bones here. And Braithwaite really has it in his head that Spock coerced Bones into pulling the plug on Kirk, thus murdering him in an attempt to take over the Enterprise. Also, Braithwaite is convinced that Spock was Mordreau's accomplice and had somehow arranged to release Mordreau from his confinement, even though the security officers all attest to the fact that Mordreau never left the room. And this is completely discarding the whole fact that Braithwaite should have known about the whole time travel duplicate Mordreau thing from the future, but he's not bringing it up because why he thinks all this and what his justifications for the theories are is never explained. But he's all ate up about it. And I think we're just meant to hate the guy because he's a lawyer. But all this scene really did was get me annoyed with McIntyre's failure to create convincing characters. Okay, Spock has traveled through time in a process that isn't described almost at all, except that it's accompanied by rainbow lightning, and that it's also very painful. Spock reappears in the same transporter room, except it's a day earlier. On his way out, he encounters Scotty and they have a brief conversation, as they did earlier. Scotty then leaves Spock and goes up to the bridge and briefs the captain about the engines, where he encounters a duplicate Spock from the present. And nobody will believe Scotty that he had just seen a duplicate Spock. So, after Scotty leaves the transporter room, Spock hurries to the turbo lifts where he encounters the assassin Mordreau, who gets the drop on Spock and shoots him in the head. Mordreau gets away, gets on the lift, goes up to the bridge, shoots Kirk and Flynn, and the rest is history. Spock has failed and so returns to the present. Spock regroups with McCoy in medical, who patches up his head wound, and he wasn't affected by that spiderweb terrorist poison because the bullet only grazed him and the web stuff went into the bulkhead, and I don't know, he's fine. So since Spock failed to save Kirk's life one day ago, he decides that he needs to go back to Aleph Prime and prevent the Enterprise from being summoned to Aleph Prime to take on Mordreau as a prisoner in the first place. So McCoy and Spock arrange to tap the sublight engines to power the time changer to send them back 3 days prior to Aleph Prime. Captain Hunter and Sulu have come aboard the Enterprise to investigate Kirk's death. McCoy feeds Hunter a bunch of lies about what's been going on with Spock, specifically concealing the time travel plot to save Jim Kirk, because the Federation has outlawed this form of time travel, secretly and strictly forbidding it, and anyone who even knows about this form of time travel is at risk of not only losing their careers, but being sent to rehab. And so even though Hunter easily sees through McCoy's lies, she doesn't know why he's lying, and so she goes off in search of Mordreau for answers. McCoy is waiting for the ship's power to die, an indication that Spock has gone back in time, and thus is safe from any investigation. McCoy is getting antsy. Has something gone wrong? Why hasn't he gone back in time yet? Now, Sulu was brought along with Hunter in order to help interface with the crew of the Enterprise during the investigation. But Sulu dipped out without even checking in with Hunter, and he goes off into stasis and visits Flynn's corpse, and that's where we leave him. The abandoning of one's post is yet another example of a characteristic I find atypical of Starfleet officers. Spock and present-day prisoner Mordreau somehow deduce that future assassin Mordreau was the one responsible for summoning the Enterprise to Aleph Prime using the ultimate override command in the first place. How do they deduce this, and why is this his plan at all? I don't know. It's never explained. Spock still wants to go back and prevent Mordreau from creating the naked singularity, but Mordreau is being very stubborn and is holding Spock to his word not to suppress his work. Fate of the universe be damned. As they debate this, Braithwaite and Scotty track Spock down and catch him wearing the time changer. This is when Braithwaite suddenly knows that time travel is a thing. And he's not learning it in this moment, he's suddenly known it all along. It would be one thing if he just figured it out, but no, he's known the whole time. Scotty threatens Spock with formal charges of unfitness, and Spock tells him that he's going to be charged with mutiny if he does. Scotty then has a total hissy fit and just screams at Spock to explain what's going on, to answer his questions. But Braithwaite just loses patience for all this back and forth and straight up attacks Spock. Instead of defending himself, Spock just runs away. He takes off running towards the transporter room, and Braithwaite and Scotty give chase. Meanwhile, Hunter and Bones come across Spock with the time changer running away from the crazed attorney. Hunter, understandably, is puzzled by what's going on. But Hunter's response to being puzzled is to pull her phaser and point it at Spock just as Spock reaches the altered transporter in the transporter room. Braithwaite screams at Hunter to shoot Spock, but she hesitates just long enough for Spock to activate the time changer and to disappear in a flash of rainbow lightning. And the power goes out on the Enterprise. If all this sounds terrible, it is. Hunter redoubles her investigation, now armed with the fact that time travel is involved. Braithwaite tries to win Hunter over to his side with all his crazy, unhinged theories about Spock trying to sell the Enterprise and the crew off to the Klingons, but Hunter thinks he's off his rocker and just straight up ignores him. She does take it very seriously, however, that the Federation has outlawed this form of time travel, and so she agrees very reluctantly to give Spock 12 hours to make good on his mission in the past. But Spock has already gone to the past. Whether his mission fails or succeeds, it's happened already. And waiting any amount of time for Spock's actions in the past to resolve in the present makes no goddamn sense. It's as if McIntyre seems to think there's a 1-to-1 correlation between the past and present. It's at this point that Braithwaite blissfully falls out of the plot because he falls ill with botulism poisoning. Latent botulism poisoning. Apparently, Bones discovers that it's been in his system since he left Aleph Prime and somebody tried to kill him days ago, but it's just now catching up to him. Whatever. Like, he's just gone from the book. We don't ever have to hear from him again. All right, score 1 for McIntyre here. I, for one, will be taking my writing cues from her from here on out. If ever I have a character, a nasty little twerp that needs to be excised from my novel forthwith, then I'm not just going to kill him off. He's going to come down with a crippling, terrible case of botulism. That is so much more satisfying than just killing him off. Spock materializes in thin air and falls 2 meters to the ground on Aleph Prime. So even though when Spock traveled back in time, he was on board the Enterprise in deep space halfway to Rehab Colony 7, he was able to configure the time changer to not only send him back 3 days, but also to send him back to the Aleph Prime colony. Spock hides in a hallway near the emergency transmitter in a minor government building, waiting for future Murdro to show up and use the ultimate override command to summon the Enterprise to 11 Prime. An hour later, lo and behold, Murdro shows up and Spock wastes no time in stunning him with his phaser. Spock has secreted Murdro into an empty courtroom on Aleph Prime. The professor slowly regains consciousness under Spock's careful watch. But after a brief discussion, it turns out that this Murdro isn't the evil future Murdro at all. This is a good guy Murdro from an intermediate future point who's come back in time to stop the future Murdro from summoning the Enterprise to Aleph Prime in the first place. If you're not quite following this, that's okay. I've got literally dozens and dozens of hours wrapped up in the study of this plot, and I've come to the conclusion that it's just not possible to summarize it adequately. You see, it's never explained how this intermediate good guy Murdro could know that the future version of himself is going to go insane and blame Kirk and come back in time and kill him for something that hasn't happened in the good guy's present. So how does he know to come back and stop it? That's just never explained to us. So how am I supposed to explain it to you? Anyway, so realizing that the evil Murdro is yet to be apprehended, Spock rushes past the good guy Murdro, hurries out of the room, back to the emergency communications panel. A second future Murdro, the evil future Murdro, is already standing there at the panel, and he's already made the call using the ultimate override command. And he cackles, "It's too late!" Evil Murdro then immediately engages his time changer and disappears in a flash of rainbow lightning. Now, Spock and the good guy Murdro both know that the ultimate override command, once sent, can't be unsent. It can't be rescinded. It's part of the safety protocols. So, Spock has failed again. And so the only thing left to do, as suggested by the good guy Murdro, is to go back in time to stop the past Murdro from ever sending the scientists into the past in the first place. Murdro finally concedes this point, that this is the only way to properly reset the timeline. And he says, "The universe keeps proving to me how much easier it is to create chaos than order." Almost as if order and entropy are opposing forces. This good guy Murdro explains to Spock just how bad things are in this middle future that he comes from. In his future, the entropy effect has already started to tear star systems apart. The universe has begun to collapse. In this future, Spock has been sentenced to rehabilitation for meddling with the timeline and actually dies trying to resist the reprogramming of his mind. Ian Braithwaite has succeeded in convicting Bones of Captain Kirk's murder. And there are several unaccounted for other Murdros running around the timeline trying to fix things here and there, and this good guy Murdro can't keep track of them all. But so far, none of the duplicate Murdros have been successful in stopping the original past Murdro from using the time machine in the first place. But it turns out that this good guy Murdro has actually tried to stop his past self from creating the singularity before, but he's failed, he figures, because he's coming back from so far in the future. Spock is not so far removed, so Spock is free to do this himself. And so Spock finally decides to go back in time to stop the past Murdro from creating the naked singularity. It was way too hard for this hero to decide to save the entire universe. Good guy intermediate future Murdro wants to go back in time with Spock, but Spock convinces him that it's a bad idea because time travel takes a heavy toll on the body, and Murdro has already time traveled several times, and he's in a very weakened state, and this jump into the past very well might kill him. So Spock recalibrates the time changer and decides he's going to go alone. So now for the third time, Spock jumps back, this time to a month ago. When the rainbow lightning dissipates, Spock has collapsed on the floor and he is experiencing a great amount of pain. This is the biggest jump yet, and it hurts him tremendously. but he withstands it because he's a Vulcan and he can handle it. When he rises, he realizes he's surrounded by 7 adult figures. One of them looks like the present-day Mordreau. So Spock has indeed found the past Mordreau and his 6 scientist friends before they go back into the past. He has time to stop them. He immediately sets to action trying to convince them that their present course of action has disastrous consequences for the entire universe. I'm just kidding. That would make too much sense. What Spock actually does is try to convince the scientists to abort their time travel plans because their work directly results in the death of his bestest ever friend, and Spock has come back to try to save his pal. But none of the scientists, not even past Mordreau, cares about saving Kirk's life. A scientific achievement so great as the discovery of time travel is worth any one person's life, any 2 people's lives. Sacrifices must be made in the name of progress, and who in the bleeding hell are you, Spock, to try to stop us? So after lecturing the 6 friends about their use of profanity, Spock resorts to Plan B. Actually explain about the entropy effect. How the universe's total entropy will accelerate exponentially until the entire universe is torn apart within the next 100 years. But of course they don't believe him, so Spock types up all these mathematical proofs so complex that only 2 of the scientists in the room can even follow his logic. One is Dr. Mordreau and the other is Marie, the inventor of the time changer. But still, none of the scientists will be swayed. Marie says there isn't a shred of evidence for any of Spock's complicated proofs. So here's a first. In an attempt to actually explain something in this book, Spock says there is no evidence for its existence because it does not yet exist. As you can see, the current numerical value is extremely small, but as you can also see, it is depending on the value of t minus t sub 1 squared. The value of t is dependent upon the moment at which you distort the temporal continuum by sending people back in time and leaving them there. Marie, this supposedly brilliant scientist, rebuffs this physics proof with the retort, "That's the stupidest thing I ever heard." Is it the stupidest thing you ever heard? At this point, one of the friends sneaks up behind Spock, puts him in a headlock, drags him across the room. And as Spock throws the guy over his shoulder, dispatching with that clown, and he's like flexing over him, Marie sneaks up behind him and does the Vulcan neck pinch on Spock, and Spock just crumbles to the floor. And with Spock sprawled out on the ground, the scientists just decide that it's time to leave before it's too late. As Spock's vision is all glassy and everything, the room fills with rainbow lightning, and he worries that once again he has failed. He's failed for the 3rd time. But as the lightning fades and his vision clears, he recognizes that all of the scientists are still in the room, but a new person has entered. The older, good guy intermediate future Mordreau has arrived in the room and collapsed to the floor. Past Mordreau and all his 6 friends are standing around in a circle staring at this man in shock and amazement. Spock rushes to his side. He's like, "Sir!" And the good future Mordreau says, "Nothing changed. I waited, but the chaos, nothing changed." And Spock says, "They're determined to go. I tried to show them what would happen." And the future Mordreau grips Spock's wrists and he looks around the room at everybody standing around him. "I don't want to die like this." Past Mordreau sits back on his heels and says, "My God, look!" Just as the good guy future Mordreau disintegrates into dust. And Spock says he knew he would die if he came back this far. He knew it. He feared it. By his time, the changes you have caused have become so intolerable that he deliberately chose death to try to stop you. Why did he disintegrate into dust? I don't know. It's never explained. So finally, after seeing a future version of their own colleague die and disintegrate into dust at their feet, they decide not to time travel, and one by one, they walk away from their plans. So Spock wasn't the hero at all. Mordreau was. Well, one of the Mordreaus was a hero. So the next thing we see is Captain Kirk waking up from a nightmare, along with all the other crew mentioned in this book. Commander Flynn and Sulu are in bed sleeping off an intimate night together. They've both had nightmares, but they don't want to talk about it. Both Captain Kirk and Captain Hunter, on their individual ships, they haven't seen each other in years, but they both start their day thinking about each other. The timelines have been reset, and everyone is none the wiser. Only Spock remembers what happened. Yet, Spock used the time changer to travel back to the present, even though he told Bones that if he was successful in resetting the timelines, he would be sent back automatically. And also, the time changer survived this whole ordeal, and even after the timelines were set, the time changer was seen by Kirk, McCoy, and Scotty. But Spock just lied to him and told him it was an instrument he used to study the singularity. Now, Kirk knew he was lying because he knows Spock. Spock the liar, apparently. But Kirk just let it go. I guess he has actually seen enough weird shit to know when to pick his battles and when to let Spock keep his little secrets. Anyway, the book ends with the Enterprise in orbit around the naked singularity. And Spock informs Kirk that the singularity is collapsing in on itself and will implode in 6 days' time, so the Enterprise has plenty of time to get away. Why was the naked singularity still there even after the timelines were successfully reset? I don't know, it's never explained. But if I was in the market for conspiracy theories, I would say that Spock didn't actually reset the timeline. Instead, he created a new one, albeit perhaps a more stable one. The singularity formed because somebody went back in time. And it got worse and worse and worse because that person never came back from the past. Well, if the singularity is collapsing, that means somebody went back in time and came back to the present eventually, but the timelines were altered. Otherwise, the singularity would have never existed. So my theory is that one of the 6 scientist friends of Mordreau actually did go back in time, but returned to their present at some point. And I'm guessing it was Param. And I haven't mentioned who Param is by name, but Param was the one who put Spock in a headlock earlier. He was the angriest one about the dismantling of their plans to time travel. So it makes sense that he might be the one to come back and actually do it later. But did Vonda McIntyre consider any of this? Was any of this explained? Captain's log, stardate 5001.1. We are now a day away from the singularity, and the unease that gripped the Enterprise and my crew throughout the entire mission has faded, leaving in its place a feeling of relief. I have decided to take the Enterprise through the border region between Federation space and Klingon territory, which is guarded by Captain Hunter's fleet. The appearance of a ship of the line should boost their morale. Mr. Spock is recovering from severe overwork. He has assured Starfleet that the singularity will soon wipe itself out of the universe. My science officer shows no more sign than before that he is willing to discuss the unpredictable events that occurred during his observations. Despite a certain temptation to ask him if this was information we were not meant to know, I am not inclined to press him for more answers. It's possible that he simply made some sort of mistake that would humiliate him to reveal. Whatever did happen seems only to have involved Spock himself. It has not affected the Enterprise at all, and that, of course, is always my main concern. So that's Vonda N. McIntyre's The Entropy Effect from 1981. What's my final review? Well, if you've been paying attention, you'll know that, yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I mean, obviously, I have my problems with the book. It's not a perfect book. Since I first finished The Entropy Effect a few weeks ago, I've been considering tracking down the first couple of seasons of the original series of Star Trek. And like I said in the intro, I've never seen a single episode of any series of Star Trek, but I have seen hundreds of clips and a lot of memes. Vonda McIntyre won the 1979 Hugo Award for her novel Dream Snake. She was the recipient of 4 Nebula Awards. Not too shabby. McIntyre's celebrated career in science fiction saw forays into the Star Wars and Star Trek universes, writing 5 Star Trek novels, including The Entropy Effect. So when I discovered that, I sat up a little straighter in my chair and I thought maybe I should take this book seriously. This book. I get the feeling that The Entropy Effect here would make a really terrific episode of the original series. If not like a double episode, like a special or something, if they made those. Sure, I had my problems with it, right? I know what I'm reading here. The Entropy Effect isn't great literature. It's not even great sci-fi, honestly. But what it is it's a great pulp novel. and I basically turned it into pulp. But there were some scenes written with real emotional weight. In particular, the scene when Kirk is shot in the chest and Spock mind melds with him to share his strength to ease Kirk's pain. That was really good. And there were a lot of really good scenes in the book. There was a lot of stuff that I left out of this summary, spoiler-heavy review, mostly because it's already ridiculously long as it is. But there are a lot of characters that she added, in particular the security team. There's a 5-member security team under Mandela Flynn. These are all unique characters to this book alone, and I really wish that the book had been told from their point of view. They were some of the best characters, I thought, in the book. And when left to Vonda McIntyre's own devices, when she's creating her own characters, she seems to do really well. It was just her treatment of the existing IP that I took issue with. I'm not even really a fan. I can only imagine how diehard fans might feel reading this. And maybe this is my benefit of looking back 42 years after this thing is written. I don't know. I also suspect that the studio had probably put some kind of pressure on Vonda McIntyre to get this book out really fast. And the idea for the book might not have even been hers. I really don't know. I know that sometimes these books get commissioned and they say, we want you to write a time travel novel. Maybe she didn't really particularly want to, and this is the best that she came up with. I really don't know. But one thing's for certain, I'm not going to judge Vonda McIntyre's entire oeuvre based on this book. That would be unfair. The Entropy Effect certainly had its weak points, but that's enough of that. I need a drink. After all of that, I need a drink. What was that McCoy says earlier? He gazes into his amber liquid and says, amazing how many different supposedly intelligent species choose a downright poison as their recreational drug of choice. Indeed. Oh, that's pretty good. I just made this drink. I just made this up. I had no idea if this was going to taste good. Here's the recipe if you're curious. I really like this. Anyway, that's going to be it for me. If you want more videos like this, you have to let me know in the comments. I've put like 40 or 50 hours into making this video. It's way too much, but it was kind of fun. If there's anybody who wants me to spoil more bad books, look, I've got a couple more. I've got this X-Files book and this A-Team book. I mean, you guys aren't going to read these either. And if you want me to give these books the same treatment that I gave the Entropy Effect, you got to let me know in the comments. Otherwise, I'm just never going to read these. But if you want me to tear them apart, I will. I promise. I'll do it. But you have to tell me in the comments. All right, that's going to do it for me. See you in the next one. Kirk orders his chief security officer, Lieutenant Commander Mandela Flynn, to put on a big show of security for the sake of the lead processing. I am not born to talk fast, but this is too long to talk slow. Kirk orders his chief security officer, Lieutenant Commander Mandela Flynn, to put on a big show of security for the lead processing attorney.